Thanks very much. Do you want to take time to enjoy an exploding logo behind my name? Because, well, we can get that every day. There's like a really strong light that I can't see anything. Is that going to change? Or not? All right, well, thanks very much, everyone. I can see only a haze as I look out at you. I'm going to talk about learning about people, discovering and acting on insights about people, and I'll try to unpack that phrase a little bit as we go. What I think is interesting in my work as a user researcher and a consultant to companies to help them bring insights into their design processes, into their products, and so on. What I've just found interesting over the years is that there's a presumption or an expectation that learning from people is something that's very direct. What do people want? We'll just ask them that and then we'll make it. But I think a lot of the fun stuff and the complicated stuff and the innovation comes from I guess I'll call it the indirection. And I want to talk about some of the methods. I'll explore some of those very briefly that are indeed indirect and what we can learn from that. And there's a couple of things that come from doing this kind of research, from talking to people and learning from them. We learn the things that we need to understand in order to design for them. And that's improvements, iterations to products and services, or opportunity spaces that are unmet, where we can create new kinds of products and services. But the second piece, and I think this is a nice parallel, at least to some of what you're talking about, is that going through these processes, learning from people, connecting with them, creates changes inside the organization. It changes how we think, how we act, how we talk, how we design at the cultural level. And I think of some of your diagrams where you were kind of getting at that, Peter. So I want to speak to that as well. So that's kind of the two thrusts that I'll explore in sequence here. So this would be my defining the damn thing slide, the DT. When people talk about user research or design research, you see methodologies listed. And I don't know, this is like a list I've accumulated. It's not particularly complete. There are times in which it's really important to understand what the differences between these are. Some of them, the differences are purely semantic, and some of them, the differences are significant. But there's sort of more in common than there is different here. And I find this discussion of what's the difference and what's the similarity can be really, really distracting. So, here's kind of my first answer. Whatever. Like, let's not waste our time on this part. What I would really like to see people talking about, and this is what I'll offer as a definition, whatever you want to call it, the thing that I'm interested in doing and in having designers do and innovators do and engineers and managers and whatever your title is to, and there's some careful word choices here I can go through, is to examine people, and ideally in their own context. So examine is just that's a neutral word. I mean, it may evoke being at the doctor, but I'm not specifying what we're asking them to do, what we're looking at, how we're kind of being with them. But there's some act of going to look at what's happening. Ideally in their own context, and there's plenty of exceptions where being in the context where what you're interested in is happening isn't feasible, isn't possible, isn't desirable given what you want to understand. But the thrust here is getting out of our world, our cubicle, our studio, whatever it is, and trying to engage and connect with and immerse in their world. Things that we do under examine, that's gathering stories. That's understanding not only what are people doing, but also what meaning, what framework, what understanding have they attached to it. It's often going to be very different than ours. And that's the difference between the behavior and the meaning, I think, is key here. Synthesize stories. So data is not simply collected and aggregated, and folks that were so great in the workshop that I did yesterday really went through this process very, very well, and I watched them go from even quickly collecting anecdotes and simple observations to putting together something new. And synthesis is about building up something new from smaller pieces. They were great. They found patterns, they found connections, and they created something new that emerged. So again, we're not simply repositories of data, and we're not simply transferers of data. We're transforming it through this interpretive creative process to find these patterns, to find what the outcomes are. And the third piece, and this is a bullet point, but it's really important because I think it doesn't get always remembered. We have to do something with this. I think that's why, in my own description of my company, we shy away from using the word research or saying that we do research or are researchers. I feel like that's a limiting term, and that if I tell you that's what I'm going to do, you think you're going to get a report from me that tells you what I observed. And really, what we're in the business of and why we want to use these tools is to make something new. So people who are designers, maybe that's obvious. People who are kind of sit on the research side of the spectrum, I think we kind of struggle. We're not in the making business, but we want to make sure that what gets learned gets put into something that is made. So research has to be done in a way that leads to some application, to a business problem, a design problem. If we're synthesizing stories, we want to develop new stories. And two things here, and this goes back to what I said my purpose was, changing how we talk and think about people. That's an outcome that starts to change the business. And then also, what can the business do that's different? New packages, new products, new services, new stories, new marketing, new architectures, all those things can come out of this. So other than referencing visiting the doctor, what do I mean by examine? This isn't an exhaustive list, but I want to sort of open this up a little bit so we can think about what some possibilities are. So the classic method under whatever design research, whatever we're talking about here, whatever our label is the interview. That's the explicit question. So tell me, how are you using this product? But as interviewers, as design researchers, we can also do other things. We can ask people to perform tasks. We can ask them to draw a map of something. So this is, and maybe this is, I'm overstating the case here, but let's just think about that idea of being indirect. If we want to get a map of the computer network, we probably can get that from a specification that the IT department has, filed in the wiki under a certain policy and procedure and so on. Asking someone to draw us a map of the computer network gets us a combination of what their perception is and also, we're getting close to what the true data is, but there's reasons to get at what people's perceptions are. Participation and demonstration, it's the same question, but it's a little bit different. Can you show me how I should make a Whopper? So now we're asking the person we want to learn what their behavior is, what their mental model is, what their framework is. We're asking them to act as teachers. Well, that lets them express their sequence of steps that maybe is implicit. It forces them to make it explicit. Demonstration, show me how you update your playlists. So that's a different way, and maybe that's more of a personal activity where the person couldn't show me how to do it because it's personal to them. So some of these are just kind of question flips, but I want to kind of go through the structure a little bit to see that there's a real diversity of ways to approach some of these indirect things, to try to understand what is it that people are thinking, what are they doing, what does it mean to them. Role playing. Wow, we interviewed this guy a few years ago who just kept complaining about this the experience he would have when he called this phone support system. And we asked him, all the follow-up questions. Well, why? What's wrong with it? What would you like? How would you want it to be different? And he just kept saying, well, I don't know. He just was not the most articulate fellow, and this question kind of stuck. He didn't know how to move forward. So we did a little role-playing game. And so we didn't come in with a stage and make it very, very formal. It's just a questioning technique. So I said, well, why don't you be, you be the receptionist, and I'll be the customer. I'll call you up. And we did a little play act. I said, ring, ring, and he did a hello. I mean, we went through just a very quick thing in 30 seconds, and he gave a great demonstration by acting it out. So it was kind of like the previous show me demonstration question, but here he was able to answer something that he couldn't put into words just by playing with it. Some other kinds of methods that we can use, and this is where I talk about contextual. We're not always fully contextual. There's things maybe we ask people to do when we're not with them. So logging activities. We've done things like asking people to fill out a booklet. Every day they try it. We're assigning them a new feature, and they try it, and they fill it out. It's not feasible to sit with someone over 2 weeks while they learn to use a new product. So we're not in context with them during that, but we can structure their behavior. This is not naturalistic. This is not what would actually happen. So again, we're being kind of indirect. We're changing and pushing things to try to make insights and different behaviors kind of pop up. Homework activities. I looked at people's perception of a mailer, and in preparation for that, I had them save up all their junk mail. Anything they didn't have to open, I had them save it up, and then they opened it with me and gave me kind of a narrative. Again, not naturalistic. You would open your mail every day. You wouldn't deal with 2 weeks in most situations. The other thing we're doing here is priming them. Right? We are letting them think about the topic in a deep way that they wouldn't otherwise be able to surface. Stimuli, and I'll show some examples around this topic in a minute, asking people to look at things. So, and I'll talk in a couple minutes about the difference between testing and just kind of prompting. That's really what we're getting at here. Different kinds of exercises to get people to do, sketching out an idealized solution, getting people to unpack their, well, I wouldn't ask them to unpack their fridge, but that'd be a little bit messy, but getting the tour, what's in the fridge, what's in the garage, what's in the attic, what's in your wallet, those kind of very, very unnatural types of interactions that produce a broad-based understanding of some set of behaviors. And a general approach is just asking someone what they would do. How would they solve a problem? Participatory design, this term can mean a lot of different things. What I'm really talking about here is letting people speak not about their own needs, but to speak about the solution. It doesn't mean that we implement their solution. It means that we're giving them another way to express something. So the classic one, I think, is when people say, well, geez, I wish this piece of hardware had a handle on it. Well, a handle really means they want some way to carry it around. It doesn't mean that designers have to then go and build a handle. You can think of 7 other ways to move something around easily. Shoulder straps, grips underneath, clips, on and on and on like that. Those are solutions to the need. So we're being very indirect. We're letting them talk about design, but what we're trying to understand is needs. And there's that picture there. We had people design an interface, and we gave them kind of very few constraints, and they talked about and even sketched out what the solution would look like. And it was great to get a whole bunch of those back from people and see what bubbled up. How were people thinking about and organizing and categorizing the different types of functions, the different types of commands, and that drove the whole design. We didn't implement anyone's requests, but we got a better sense of what the underlying approach they were looking for was. Just like in the role play example I described, where we're trying to move people kind of beyond what exists that's kind of in front of them into something that is slightly more impossible. If you can't sketch it out, this is one of the questions you hear in user research is, well, how do I study what people want if the thing that we want to talk about doesn't exist? So here's an example here. We used a kind of a game situation to let people really play with the future. In fact, the technological setting that our client was thinking about was very smart web interfaces that pulled all sorts of context about you and your location, the weather in that location, your tax status, your personal status, what movies we're playing, on and on and on and on, in order to create a very custom experience for you. Now that we sort of have bits and pieces of that, but not in a way that people were aware of and could kind of reflect on. So we did a bunch of role-playing games that were very, very cartoonish, and we created these props. And we did this kind of group role-playing game where we had people with wearing little signs around them. They were parts of the smart home, and one person was the smart kitchen, and one person was the garage. And we we set up these kind of actors, and then we let them play out a scene and just do whatever they wanted, and then we debriefed as to about the choices that they were making. And then we iterated that a few times. We had one person be the computer, and we had a little computer monitor that they put their face in. And then we had somebody else be J-Lo or Britney Spears and go shop or go do some internet activities. And they acted out. It was very silly. It was very, very playful. And of course, what we were doing was breaking beyond how things were today. That silliness and that playfulness meant that people could take a big leap into what the future could be, what the possibilities could be. And then from that, we backed that out to principles, best practices, what they wanted, what they didn't want, and why that was. I mentioned this a moment ago, the difference between testing and exploring. And I think the naive approach to getting people involved and giving feedback in the middle of the design process is to just hold up your thing and say, do you like this? Do you like this? Good. Or no, why not? And I guess I would avoid that. I think there's prototyping processes and refinement processes that we use for design. There's also different kinds of artifacts that we can create in terms of getting input from users. Those are provocations, those are prompts, those are things that explore the issues. So this picture just is great, with a little teeny tiny phone. Of course that phone isn't viable and so on, but it's an interesting thing to show someone to start getting at issues of, well, loss of the device, the ability to interact with the controls in the device. So you're creating very large ones, very small ones, very ridiculous ones. It's meant to provoke a conversation, not to get a thumbs up, thumbs down. So we're doing something very different here. And beyond just the do you like this, I think we so often see that's the question our clients ask us to explore, and the question that needs to be explored is, what do you think this thing is, and what problem do you think it's solving for you? What's it replacing? What will it do? What's the fundamental story here? I mentioned stories before. This is the thing that so often emerges. I can't believe how many seemingly very obvious product explorations we do where the question that emerges is, well, people don't understand what this thing is. And so keeping that question in mind as well and using this chance to converse with people to explore that topic. Because ultimately, if you fail to answer that question, no matter how much kind of marketing and packaging you put around what you put out there in the world, if people can't figure out what it is, you have a definite challenge. Just a little bit about pain points. This also is often how I see user research projects framed. What problems do people have? And let's go see what did they regard as a pain point so that we can fix it. There's another question that goes behind that, which is, and I showed this example in the workshop yesterday on the right here, the drawer full of discarded electronic junk. Well, the pain point is that people have drawers full of discarded electronic junk. If we don't understand why that's happening, we probably can't address the problem. We might start creating bigger drawers. Right? What is it that's going on here at a systemic level, at a purchasing level, at a hoarding level? What's the sort of, I'm theorizing here, but what is it that we really need to address to really solve the problem and not just throw another Band-Aid on it to make the kind of change we want to make? And the thing with pain points, of course, is they're not always that painful for people. And if you know the word satisficing, it's a great word. It deals with how people will tolerate or even just accept good enough solutions. And designers and engineers sometimes go crazy when they see people tolerating that stuff. Well, that person's getting away with something that doesn't quite work as well as it could. They haven't set it up right. People are often fine with that. Here's a picture on the left. This was a fax machine where the phone cord that it was going to the phone line was about 4 inches too long or too short. It was kind of jammed there. It was held in place by the tension to the wall. For that person to fax, they had to kind of lean over their monitor. The thing was very, very unstable. This was maybe 9 years ago. If they still live there, I'm sure it's like that. It was not a good solution, but they were going to stay like that. And I think as user experience people, we tend to kind of fetishize this idea of people not optimizing, and even we have blogs where we can laugh at people that do things like nail curtains into the wall. There I fixed it. That suggests like people are idiots. In fact, people are working within their own constraints in a perfectly satisfactory way. So yes, it's kind of funny, but there's a reason why these things happen. So understanding people's desire for change is different than maybe how we want to frame it. And this example from Microsoft is just such a pain point focused, really, really misses the boat. And I'm sorry, any Microsoft people here, but this is a really naive view of how kind of Windows 7, the most user-centered version of Windows ever to come out, apparently. Because what did they do? They just sat there and they waited for people to articulate, I'd like a lower memory footprint. Is that possible? Oh, good idea. We'll get to work on that. As if Microsoft didn't know that was something they'd want to optimize, and as if people were expressing their needs kind of in this way. This is this kind of pain point addressing approach to design. I don't mean that Microsoft necessarily did this, but they thought that was a good story to tell about how much they're connecting with people, and I think that that's a disappointing story. Just really quickly on this slide here, even how we approach who to talk to is a way to be where we can bring in some indirection into the process. And often I hear people suggesting, well, you want to talk to our customers. And it's one of these things where, well, we own 12% of the market. Let's talk to those 12% so we can create a better experience for them. Well, you don't own 88% of the market, so maybe those people can give you some insight. Not whether or not you can convert them or not. What's the difference between these different types of people? What about the people that love your product? What about the people that started using it and stopped using it? What about people that come from adjacent points of view? The picture is a trigger here for a dog food design project that a colleague of mine was involved in, and they went and talked to chefs. So they're trying to get at different angles on food preparation, on food consumption. Not that chefs literally make the dog food that they're going to serve, but they want different angles in. And that's that kind of triangulation. You're looking for factors you wouldn't otherwise see. Again, being very indirect, trying to create contrast and bring things into reveal. So let's talk a little bit about the change we're trying to induce here. Here we are spending several days doing workshops, seeing talks. We have a lot of access to this kind of information. The techniques themselves are teachable, and people like you guys invest your time, your companies invest your time and money in developing that. And I think the things for teams to think about is like, well, what are we already good at? What can we learn? What do we need to build? And that's what drives the adoption of these pieces here. But again, I want to talk about the cultural shift. So what are we as an organization as we start to build these tools, we start to design things, we start to change how things are being built out, we start to change what we learn about people? Are we willing to identify a different problem than the one that we've already committed to solving? You see mission statements about what companies are here to enable. Is that what people are looking for? Do you want to hear that differently and act on it? What kind of solutions are there that might be different than what we've already decided the solutions are? If you learn that people need a different kind of solution than one that you've committed to, can you act on that? Can you pivot, to overuse a term, effectively enough to take advantage of that? That's a hard question to ask, and I think you really need to ask that very carefully before you go into some of these processes, because the information you get back might be embargoed if the organization isn't ready at that point. I was like, what a great example of this. They're not ready, and you need to work with them to get them ready. There's a lot of ambiguity here, and for certain types of problem solvers, ambiguity is very, very uncomfortable. Some of these processes make things messier before they make them clearer, and they raise questions that are hard to answer. That's a cultural challenge to the organization. Some of the types of data that we work with are rich in stories, but are not truthful. They're not provable. They're not statistical. And of course, anyone that's stat savvy will tell you the same thing about that kind of data. But that kind of has the sheen of rigor that this data doesn't always have. So to change culture, a couple of things, and this is from a really great Harvard Business Review blog post I encourage you to check out. But really the thrust of it was to change culture by doing two things. One, do things that are worthy of telling stories. And the stories are symbolic of what the culture should evolve to. Let other people tell stories, or find things that symbolize that kind of future that you're looking for and tell stories about it. And the example that the author gives is if you want to be kind of fast-moving and more error tolerant, don't berate people for sending out a memo with typos in it. In fact, you should send out a memo with typos in it. Like really go towards the opposite to start to manifest and create discussion around that. The culture shifts around stories and behaviors. So in terms of trying to integrate these tools into design and development processes, I think this is the main thing I want to emphasize here is don't lead with the process, lead with what you're going to get. Why are we doing this? Do we have the information we need? If not, then this is the approach that will get it. So people struggle, I know, with getting these kinds of processes adopted in their organization. I think telling the story as to why this is important is something that we can continue to do a better job about that. We're trying to solve a business problem, not utilize a methodology. The methodology is whatever. The outcome is what we're going to drive towards. This came up in conversation the other night, so I was glad to bring this back in. Just as a quick example of some frameworks, you can look at your own organization and see where are they at. This is a framework about changing behavior. It's around things like health maintenance and healthcare and helping people that are dealing with addictions or eating disorders and so on. And you can see where people are at. If you go to, it's kind of a small, you probably can't read it from here, but you can see this framework used as kind of a call and response thing. If you can assess, diagnose where the person is, where the organization is, then here's how you respond. So as you're looking to make change in your own organization, make sure that your response is appropriate. I'll put these slides up on SlideShare and you can follow the links so you can read a little bit more about how to use these frameworks. Just a quick story here. I worked with a group where they were, quote, the researchers, and they were trying to drive their insights into the designers, engineers' work. And so they had this kind of understand versus create, effectively silos. And they had really started to bring the designers into the field with them, taking them to meet users and so on. And they were really frustrated with how they didn't get the uptake that they wanted. And I suggested that maybe it was their job as researchers to also get involved in the design process. And I was met with kind of a stony silence when I suggested this. This was a scary idea for people, that there should be a little more smushing together and blurring. And that was kind of what we continued to work with them on. So start to really pull these different pieces together and blur some boundaries. Folks in the workshop yesterday, we did, as I said, this whole ideation process, building from their observations into design solutions. And that's something that we do in all of our work. Again, why I don't want to call us researchers, because we are also leading kind of broad exploratory design efforts at this scale. This is where not only do the insights that we've learned start to take root, but also people start to play with this stuff, and it really, this is about burning neural pathways. Every time you start to act on what the research starts to tell you, you start to own it a little bit more. I think one of the challenges I hear from groups is we don't have time, or they don't know what the expected commitment is to do a fairly deep whatever research study. Here's kind of the framework that we use. It's about 8 to 9 weeks. You need a few weeks to even start doing the planning. Who do we want to talk to? What are we going to do? How are we going to find these people? A couple of weeks to be in the field, and a couple of weeks to make some sense out of it. So understanding this is kind of an overarching framework and timeline. Your results may vary, but to start with this, and I've heard stories from folks I've talked to where they haven't been able to use research because they never had this conversation, and in fact, people assumed it would be much, much more. We would have to talk to every customer, and we have 200 customers, and we can't talk to 200 customers, therefore we can't do this. So, your own perspective on what it might actually take can help start to drive the adoption of these tools. But then, what are the trade-offs we can make here? So here's kind of if that previous slide is my kind of preferred amount of time, here's what we've got if we really want to boil it down. What if you only have a day to plan? Well then, who can you get? Who can you grab on the street? What coworkers, family members? What do you want to do with them? You don't have a lot of time to plan methodology, but maybe it's just wide-eyed observation. What's happening? That's what the folks in the workshop yesterday did. They had no time to plan a methodology. They just went out and did an observation of the environment. And that was sufficient kind of for the scope of our problem. If you don't have more than a day to do field work, then you need, like we had yesterday, 11 teams going out. We work with clients where they set up a field day and they bring together large groups of people and everyone goes out at once. So that's a way to field quickly. You have an integration challenge if you have parallel data gathering, but you have kind of a very minimal time commitment to do the investigation. Doing something with the data, it takes us 2 to 3 days to do a deep dive. If you only have a day or something, you can't do much more than just kind of debrief. You can't dive deeply. But if you're aware of these constraints and these trade-offs and you make your colleagues and clients aware of those trade-offs, then I think you can have an effective conversation about how we're going to get to the solutions that we need to get to. Or we need these resources to get to that. I think we'll just skip this story here. And then get to the coming up here. But you can look at that silly picture of me. So just kind of wrapping up, I have a book coming out. You can sign up at that URL to be notified. Here's a request. We just started a series of fieldwork war stories. Interesting things that happen when you're out in the field that are surprising and confusing and funny. We're trying to build up an extensive archive of people's stories. And I think this will be a resource for the community to kind of look to as we see what happens when you go out in the field, what things go wrong, what things go right, what is kind of surprising and weird. So if you go to that URL, you'll see, I think there's 2 up now, and there's a form, there's a WooFoo form to fill out. I'd love to have people submit any of their interesting stories and experiences there. And with that, I'd love to hear questions and comments.